I was wearing my good blouse, the white one, with the small buttons down the front that I had ironed the night before and hung on the back of the bathroom door so it wouldn't wrinkle while I slept. I had pressed my slacks, too, and polished my shoes, the low black ones I keep, for occasions that require me to look like someone who has her life in order, which I do, which I always have. That morning, I had woken up at 6, made a pot of coffee, and sat at my kitchen table for 40 minutes, just feeling grateful. That is not something I say lightly. I am not a woman who uses that word carelessly, but I had been planning this day for 3 months. The day I would sit beside my nephew Marco in a bank office and co-sign the mortgage application that would get him into his first home, and when the morning finally came, I felt it. Gratitude. The real kind, the kind that sits in your chest, like something warm. Marco is 26 years old. He works 2 jobs, a warehouse during the week and a hardware store on weekends, and he has been doing that for 4 years, without complaint, without asking anyone for anything, saving every dollar he could get his hands on. He is the kind of young man who makes you believe the world is still capable of producing good people. When he called me 8 weeks ago and asked if I would co-sign with him, nervous, apologetic, already preparing to understand if I said no, I told him I would be honored. I meant it. So I ironed my blouse. I polished my shoes. I drove to the Chase branch on Westheimer at 9:40 in the morning, and Marco was already there, standing outside the glass doors in a button-down shirt I had never seen before, which told me he had bought something new for the occasion, which told me how much this meant to him. We shook hands with the loan officer, a young man named Patrick, mid-30s, pleasant face, and we sat down in his office. And Patrick pulled up the application on his computer, and I sat straight in my chair with my purse on my lap and my hands folded over it, and I thought, this is going to be a good day. Patrick looked at his screen. He typed something. He looked again, and then his face did the thing that faces do when they are carrying information the body doesn't want to deliver. A small tightening around the eyes, a stillness in the jaw, the kind of expression I learned to recognize in 33 years of nursing, the expression that comes right before the words that change things. He said, "Mrs. Santos, before we proceed, I need to pull your credit report as the co-signer. Standard process. Do I have your authorization to do that?" "Of course," I said. He typed. He waited. He read. And then he looked up at me, and I knew before he spoke that the good day was over. "Ma'am," he said, "I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. Are you aware that your credit report is currently showing 6 accounts in severe default? The total outstanding balance across those accounts is approximately $68,000. I heard the words. I process them the way you process something in a foreign language. You hear the sounds, you understand that they form meaning, but the meaning takes a moment to land. $68,000. 6 accounts, severe default. I had checked my credit score in January. It was 791. It is always around 791. I have maintained that number the way some people maintain a garden, with attention, with consistency, with the understanding that things left untended will deteriorate. "I'm sorry," I said. "Could you say that again?" He did. He turned the monitor slightly so I could see it. 3 pages of report, and I could see from where I was sitting that there were lines highlighted in red. Marco was very still beside me. He was looking at the table. I looked at Patrick. "There must be an error," I said, because that was the only sentence that made sense. "I have no outstanding debt. I have not applied for any new credit in over 2 years. Patrick nodded slowly, the way people nod when they are trying to be kind without agreeing with you. "I understand. What I'm seeing here includes a personal installment loan, opened 22 months ago, with a regional lender. The current balance on that account alone is $52,000, and there have been no payments made since the account was opened. There are also 3 credit card accounts, all opened within the last 2 years, all carrying balances, all delinquent. Those are not my accounts," I said. "I understand that's what you believe. Those are not my accounts, I said again, and my voice was steady, because I am a woman who has learned to keep her voice steady in rooms where decisions are being made about her, and I was not going to let it waver now, not here, not in front of Patrick, with his careful face, and his monitor turned toward me. I did not open those accounts. I did not apply for that loan. Someone has used my information without my authorization. The word I did not say yet was fraud. I knew the word. I had 33 years of understanding how paperwork worked, how identity worked, how the machinery of financial institutions operated, and I understood that what I was looking at was a crime, not a clerical error. But I did not say the word yet, because I needed to get out of that office first. I needed to get to my car. I needed to breathe. We thanked Patrick. Marco's application was paused, not denied. Paused, pending my situation being resolved, which was a kindness Patrick didn't have to extend and which I noted and appreciated. We walked out through the glass doors into the Houston heat, and Marco stood beside me on the sidewalk and said nothing for a moment. And then he said, "Tia, I'm so sorry. We don't have to." "Stop," I said. "This is not about you. I am going to fix this, and when it is fixed, we are going to come back, and you are going to get your house. Do you understand me?" He nodded. His eyes were wet, which he was trying to hide, which I pretended not to see. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. It is 11 miles from the Westheimer branch to my house on Callaway Street, and I drove all 11 of them in silence, watching the road, not thinking yet, not allowing myself to think yet, because I have learned over the course of 61 years that there is a time to feel things and a time to function, and in the car, in traffic, you function. I parked in my driveway. I sat in the car for 2 minutes. Then I went inside. My kitchen is where I have lived my whole life, even though I moved into this house on Callaway Street 22 years ago. The counter runs along the east wall, and the light comes through the window above the sink in the morning and across the table in the afternoon, and I know exactly how that light moves through the day the way I know my own heartbeat. I sat down at the table. I set my purse on the chair beside me. I looked at my hands. They were the same hands that had ironed the blouse this morning, the same hands that had poured the coffee at 6 a.m., the same hands that had held Marco's arm as we walked into the bank, a small gesture of reassurance. "I'm here. We're doing this together." I picked up my phone and I called Cecilia. Cecilia Varga has been my best friend for 20 years. We met at the hospital she was in billing, I was on the floor, and we have survived between us 2 divorces, 1 cancer scare, the deaths of 3 parents, and more ordinary grief than either of us could have predicted when we were young enough to think grief was something that happened to other people. She picked up on the second ring. "I need to tell you something," I said, "and I need you to let me get through it before you say anything." "Okay," she said. I told her about Patrick and the monitor and the $68,000. I told her about the $52,000 loan I had never applied for. I told her about the 3 credit cards I had never held in my hands. I told her about Marco on the sidewalk with his wet eyes. When I finished, there was a silence on the line, and then Cecilia said, "Evelyn, someone stole your identity." "Yes," I said. "Do you know who?" I did not answer that question. Not because I didn't have an answer forming somewhere at the edge of my mind, something cold and quiet and not yet fully shaped, but because I was not ready to say it out loud. Saying something out loud makes it real in a way that thinking it does not, and I was not ready for that kind of reality yet. "I need a name," I said. "An attorney. Someone who handles this." Cecilia gave me a name. She also told me to file a fraud report with the credit bureaus before the end of the day and to lock my social security number through the federal website immediately. She has been in hospital billing for 20 years. She knows how these systems work. After we hung up, I opened my laptop. It is a 4-year-old HP, gray, reliable, the kind of machine that works because you take care of it. I went to the credit monitoring site I have used for 12 years and logged in. My report came up, and I read it the way I have always read documents carefully, in sequence, not skipping anything. 6 accounts, all opened in the last 22 months. The loan was the largest 52,000, regional lender, a company called Sunbelt Financial, which I had never heard of, and had no reason to have heard of, because I had never borrowed money from anyone in my adult life if I could avoid it. The 3 credit cards were from different institutions. All 3 had been opened within a 4-month window. All 3 had been maxed out almost immediately after opening. None had received a single payment. And the address on the loan application was not my address on Callaway Street. It was a different address, an apartment building on the east side of the city, a zip code I recognized because I had driven to it 8 months ago, in December, carrying a dish of rice and a bottle of sparkling cider for Christmas dinner. I looked at that address for a long time. The numbers on the screen did not change. The apartment number was listed clearly, Unit 4B. I closed the laptop. I sat very still at my kitchen table in the afternoon light. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn. I could hear the motor, rhythmic and ordinary, the sound of a Tuesday continuing to happen around me. I looked at the refrigerator. I looked at the window. I looked at my hands on the table. Then I opened the laptop again, and I typed the address into the search bar, and I looked at the building on the map, and I sat with what I already knew. The apartment at that address belonged to my daughter. Sleep did not come. Not because I was not crying, but because my mind operates the way it always has in a crisis. It makes lists. It catalogs. It goes back through every room of memory and opens doors it had been content to leave shut. By 2 a.m, I had given up pretending. I got out of bed, put on my housecoat, made a cup of tea I did not want, and sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a pen. At the top of the page, I wrote the date. Below it, I wrote a single question. When did this start? Then I began to write. Not the loan, not the credit cards, not the numbers, which I already knew by heart and did not need to put down on paper to remember. What I wrote were the small things, the moments I had felt something shift but had talked myself out of calling it what it was, because calling it what it was would have required me to do something I was not ready to do. 14 months ago, Monica had called on a Sunday afternoon, her voice easy and warm, the voice she used when she wanted something and knew it. She said she was updating her rental application. The landlord at her building was asking all tenants to resubmit documentation after a change in management. She needed a co-signer's information. She said it was just a formality. She said the property management company had a new online portal, and the system required a social security number to complete the co-signer field even if no financial commitment was being made. I had given it to her. I had read the number over the phone while she typed, and she had thanked me. And we had talked for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular her job, a new restaurant she'd tried, whether I was still volunteering at the clinic, and when we hung up I felt only the ordinary satisfaction of having been useful to my daughter. The Social Security card came back in the mail 3 days later in an envelope she had addressed in her own handwriting, each digit of my zip code placed with the same care she had used since the 3rd grade. I wrote that down. I stared at it. 10 months ago, Reyes had come with Monica to Sunday dinner for the first time. I had made arroz con leche and a pot of black beans, and we sat at this table, the 3 of us, and he was, I want to use the right word, smooth. That is the word, not charming in the way that puts you at ease, but charming in the way that makes you aware you are being charmed, a slight performance of warmth rather than the real thing. He asked questions about my career. He said I looked too young to be retired. He laughed at the right moments. And toward the end of the evening, while Monica was in the bathroom, he had leaned forward slightly and said he had been helping his mother set up online banking, consolidating her accounts, linking everything to one dashboard, and that he could do the same for me if I wanted. It would make bill pay so much simpler. He could walk me through it right now if I had my login information handy. I had said no thank you. I said I preferred to manage my own accounts directly. He had nodded, smiled, moved on. Monica came back from the bathroom, and the conversation went somewhere else. I wrote that down too. and I sat looking at both entries on the legal pad and felt something that was not quite anger. Anger is hot, and what I was feeling was the opposite of hot. It was cold and still and precise. The sensation of understanding something you had been handed every piece of, in plain view, without assembling it. 6 months ago, a letter had arrived from an institution I did not recognize. I remembered the envelope, white, business-sized, printed return address in blue ink in the upper left corner. Monica had been visiting that afternoon, sitting at the counter eating fruit out of a bowl while I sorted through the stack of mail I'd pulled from the box. She had seen the envelope before. I had a chance to read the sender's name. She had reached across and picked it up, turned it over once, and said, "That looks like junk, Mama. Probably one of those credit card offers." And she had set it beside the trash can, not in it, with a casualness that now read like a rehearsed gesture. I had thrown it away myself. I had not looked at the return address. I had trusted her hand, her voice, the tone of a woman who had no reason to be anything other than what she said she was. I put the pen down. Outside, the street was quiet. Houston, in the deep middle of the night, sounds like water, a low hum of distance, of highways too far to see but close enough to feel. I looked at what I had written on the legal pad. 3 entries. 3 separate moments. And between them, a pattern so obvious, I could not understand why I had needed 6 hours in the dark to find it, except that I could actually understand exactly why, because understanding it required me to accept something about my daughter that I had been refusing to accept with the full force of my will for a very long time. I picked up the phone. I called Monica in the morning, not the middle of the night, because I am a woman who believes that conversations of consequence deserve the light of day. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice still thick with sleep, and I said, "I need you to come over. This afternoon. I have some financial paperwork I need to go through, and I'd like you to be here." She said, "Is everything okay?" I said, "I'll see you at 2. She arrived at 2:15. She was wearing a yellow sundress, the kind of easy, cheerful thing she had always reached for in summer, and she hugged me at the door the way she always had, both arms, her chin at my shoulder, and she smelled like the perfume she had worn since she was 17, a light floral, something she had found at a drugstore and never switched away from. I held the hug for the normal amount of time. I did not hold it longer. I stepped back and told her to sit down. The credit report was already on the table, printed out, all 3 pages, face down. I sat across from her. I turned it over. I slid it toward her without saying anything, and I watched her face. That is the moment I will carry for the rest of my life. Not what came after, not her words, not her voice, but those 3 seconds before she spoke, when her eyes moved across the first page of the report, and something shifted in her expression that had nothing to do with surprise. Surprise has a particular look. I know it from 3 decades in emergency rooms. The jaw loosens, the breath catches, the eyes go slightly unfocused. What crossed Monica's face was not that. It was something I can only describe as a rapid interior calculation, a brief reorganizing of position, like a chess player who has seen a piece move and is already planning the response. It lasted 3 seconds. Then she looked up at me. "Mama, I can explain." "I know you can," I said. "Go ahead," she explained. Or rather, she constructed. She said the loan had been. And here she paused, searching for the word temporary. She said she had needed money quickly, more than she had, more than she could ask me for outright, and that Reyes had told her there was a way to access funds using a co-signer's information without affecting the co-signer's credit as long as the payments were made on time. She said she had believed him. She said she had intended to make the payments. She said she had not understood the full consequences until it was already done. She did not look away when she said this. That was the thing I noted. She maintained eye contact throughout, which some people would read as honesty and which I After 61 years of reading people in rooms where they were under pressure, read as rehearsal. And the payments? I said. The ones that were supposed to be made on time. Reyes was supposed to handle that. Her voice softened on his name. He told me he had it set up automatically. I didn't know. Monica. I said it quietly. Stop. She stopped. I'm not asking about Reyes right now. I'm asking about the decision to use my information. Not his decision, yours. The calculation moved behind her eyes again, quick and private. Then she looked down at the table, and she said, I was desperate, Mama. I was so scared about money, and I didn't know what else to do. She said nothing about the 3 credit cards. She said nothing about anything beyond the loan. She offered exactly as much as she believed I already knew, and not one word more. We drove to her apartment afterward, I had asked, and she had agreed, with the kind of immediate willingness that should have told me she was confident I would find nothing there. I drove. She sat in the passenger seat, with her hands in her lap, and talked about her neighbor's dog, about a show she'd been watching, about whether the Vietnamese place on Montrose had closed. Small talk laid over the silence like a tablecloth over a damaged table. In the parking garage of her building, I noticed the key fob on her keychain. It was attached to a small orange tag, a U-Store IT logo, the kind storage facilities give out when you sign for a unit. I asked, while she was looking for her apartment key. What's that orange one? That's Reyes, she said, without pausing. He keeps a unit near his gym. I've been holding on to it for him. I nodded. I said nothing. While she unlocked the apartment door, her back to me, I raised my phone and photographed the keychain. I did it the way I had taken blood pressure readings in a room with a frightened patient smoothly, without drawing attention to my hands, without letting the moment mean anything in my face. Inside her apartment, nothing seemed wrong. That was the point I understood. Everything looked like a normal life furniture. Plants on the windowsill, photographs on a shelf, a life arranged to be seen. We had tea. I complimented the plants. I drove home. 2 days later, I drove to the U-Store facility on Federal Road, alone, at 10 in the morning. I had the unit number from the photograph. I gave it to the manager at the front desk, a heavy-set man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and asked him to look up the account. He typed. He read. He looked up at me. Accounts registered under Evelyn Santos, he said. You're Mrs. Santos? I am, I said. I'd like to see the unit. He walked me there himself. Unit 34. A roll-up door, gray metal, padlocked. He had a master key for the outer lock, a liability issue, he explained. Something about the lean process, and when he lifted the door and the fluorescent light inside flickered on, I stood at the entrance and looked at what my name had paid for. Designer handbags in their original boxes, stacked 4 high along the left wall. A 65-inch television still in its packaging. Shoes, dozens of them, in cloth bags with brand names I recognized and had never bought. A garment bag hanging from a hook in the back. Something heavy inside it. Dark fur, visible through the mesh panel. And on the wall above the bags, taped at eye level with a strip of packing tape, a receipt. I stepped forward and read it without touching it. A cruise deposit. Caribbean itinerary. 7 nights. Departure from Galveston. 2 passengers. Monica Santos. Reyes Montoya. Paid in full with a Visa card ending in 4 digits I did not recognize, but whose billing address, printed in small font at the bottom of the receipt, was my house on Callaway Street. I took a photograph of the receipt. I took photographs of everything. I thanked the manager. I walked back to my car in the mid-morning heat, and I sat in the driver's seat, and I looked at the photographs on my phone, one by one, and I felt something settle in my chest, like a stone going to the bottom of still water. Not grief, exactly, not yet, but the thing that comes just before grief. When you understand that the loss you have been bracing against has already happened and has been happening quietly for longer than you knew. I put the car in reverse. I had an attorney to call. The police station on Westheimer smelled like burnt coffee and carpet that had absorbed 20 years of difficult conversations. I noticed that before I noticed anything else, before the fluorescent lights, before the rows of plastic chairs, before the officer at the front desk who asked me twice to spell my last name, Santos. 4 letters, then 5. Simple. I have been spelling it my whole life without thinking about it. And standing there under those lights, I thought, this is the first time my name has felt like evidence. Sandra Reyes had told me to come in on Thursday. She had also told me to bring everything: the printed credit report, the photographs from the storage unit, the screenshot of the loan application address, the key fob photograph, and to bring them organized, not in a pile, not loose in a bag, but in a folder with each item labeled. Investigators respond to preparation, she had said over the phone the evening before, her voice businesslike and unhurried. Walk in looking like you know exactly what you have, because you do. I had met Sandra 2 days earlier, at her office on the 6th floor of a building on Allen Parkway, where the windows looked out over the bayou. She was 50-something, compact, with reading glasses she used as a prop, pushing them up to make a point, taking them off to signal a shift in subject. She had listened to me for 40 minutes, without writing anything down, which I had found unnerving at first, and then understood was deliberate. She was reading me, not the story. She was deciding whether I was a woman who would hold. When I finished, she had said, "There are 2 directions we can take this. Civil recovery only. We send demand letters, we negotiate with the lender, we work to have the fraudulent accounts removed from your credit, and pursue restitution through the courts. No police. No DA. The advantage is control. The disadvantage is that the people who did this face no criminal consequence and remain free to do it again. To you or to someone else." She paused. "Or we file a criminal complaint. The DA's office opens a case. It moves forward on its own timeline, under its own authority, and it does not stop because you change your mind." "What does not stop mean exactly?" I had asked. "It means that once the DA picks it up, your participation becomes secondary to the state's interest. You can decline to cooperate further, but the case continues. The evidence you provide today becomes part of the record regardless of what you decide to do tomorrow." She had looked at me directly. "Mrs. Santos, what I'm really asking is, are you prepared for this to have consequences that you cannot call back? Because those are 2 different things, wanting justice and being prepared to live with what justice actually looks like." I had sat with that question for the rest of the evening and all of the following morning. I had made coffee. I didn't drink. I had stood at the window, looking at nothing. I had thought about Roberto, my husband, dead 12 years now, gone at 52 with the absolute finality of a cardiac arrest. No warning, no slow decline, just the telephone ringing at 11 at night. And then the rest of my life beginning. Roberto had been a man who believed that doing the right thing and doing the hard thing were usually the same thing, and he had lived by that in ways that cost him and never complained about the cost. I thought about what he would have said if he were sitting across from me at the kitchen table, watching me weigh this. He would not have said anything. He would have looked at me with that steady, patient expression of his and waited for me to catch up to what I already knew. On Thursday morning, I put the folder in my bag. I drove to the station. I spelled my name. Detective Hargrove was a woman in her mid-40s with short, natural hair and the measured, deliberate movements of someone who has learned that stillness communicates authority more effectively than volume. She shook my hand, brought me to a small interview room with a table and 4 chairs, and a mirror I understood was not decorative, and she sat across from me and said, "Tell me what happened." I told her. I opened the folder and laid each document on the table as I referenced it. The credit report first, then the storage unit photographs, then the receipt with the cruise deposit, then the screenshot of the loan application address. My voice did not waver. My hands did not shake, or if they did, I did not permit myself to feel it. Detective Hargrove asked questions that were specific and unhurried. She asked when I had first noticed the key fob. She asked whether Monica had ever had a power of attorney for any of my accounts. She asked whether I had any documentation of the Sunday dinner, where Reyes had offered to help set up my online banking. I told her I did not, but that the date could be corroborated through Monica's phone records, and potentially through Reyes's own. He had sent me a follow-up text 3 days after that dinner, a friendly message asking if I had given any more thought to the account consolidation. I still had it. She wrote that down. When we finished, she slid a form across the table, the official fraud report, and I read every line before I signed it. My signature went onto that page the way signatures go onto things that matter, deliberately, with full knowledge of what I was authorizing. I initialed the bottom. I dated it. I handed the pen back. Walking out through the parking lot, I felt the Houston heat come up off the asphalt and press against my face, and for a moment I stood still and let it. The folder was under my arm. The report was filed. The machinery had been put into motion, and it would move now at its own pace and in its own direction, and there was a particular and unexpected quality to that. Not relief exactly, but something adjacent to it. The feeling of having set down a weight you had been holding without realizing you were holding it. Monica called that evening at 7:43. I was at the kitchen counter, cutting vegetables for dinner. Carrots, celery, the kind of methodical task that keeps your hands busy while your mind processes things at its own pace. The phone buzzed on the counter beside the cutting board. I looked at the screen. I set the knife down, I answered. She was crying before she spoke. Not the slow, gathering kind of crying that comes from genuine grief. This was immediate, full-voiced, present from the first syllable, the kind of crying that has been prepared. I am not a cruel woman. I do not assume the worst about a person simply because they have already shown me the worst. But I had spent 33 years in hospitals with patients who were frightened and patients who were performing, and I knew the difference between a body in pain and a body deploying pain as a tool. Mama. Her voice broke on the word in a way that was designed to break mine. I'm here, I said. I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you before. A pause timed perfectly. I'm pregnant, 12 weeks. I found out 6 weeks ago and I didn't know how to say it, and I was so scared about money, about everything, and that's why, Mama, that's why I made the decisions I made, because I was panicking, and I couldn't think straight. And Reyes kept saying it would be fine. I let her finish. I did not interrupt. I owe people the dignity of finishing their sentences, even when I can hear, in the architecture of those sentences, that they have been built for a specific purpose. When she stopped, I said, Monica, I love you. That is not something that changes. Not today, not because of any of this. She exhaled. I could hear the relief beginning to form. But what you did, I continued, and the love I have for you are two separate things. They will stay separate. I need you to understand that. Her voice shifted. Something underneath the crying surfaced a harder edge, a slight change in register. If you go forward with this, my baby's going to grow up without its mother. Do you understand what you're doing? I was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed on the street. A dog barked 2 houses down, and then went silent. The ordinary world, continuing. If I don't go forward, I said, that child is going to grow up watching its mother live without consequence. Watching her learn that the people who love you most are the ones you can take from because they will absorb it. That is not something I am willing to pass down. Not to your child, not to mine. Monica said nothing. The silence on the line was different from any silence I had heard from her before, not calculating, not prepared, just silence. I love you, I said again. That's why. I ended the call. I set the phone face down on the counter. I picked up the knife, and I stood at the cutting board. And I did not move for a long time, not cutting, not reaching for anything, just standing in my kitchen with my hands on the counter and my eyes on the wall, while something I had spent 30 years, not naming, moved through me and broke apart and settled. I thought about the first lie I had covered for her. She was 9 years old. She had told her teacher she had turned in an assignment she hadn't written, and the teacher had called me And I had gone in the next morning and explained to that teacher that there had been a family situation, that the assignment would be submitted by Friday, that Monica was a good student going through a difficult week. None of that was true. Monica had simply not done the work, and I had stood in that office and constructed a reason for her failure that removed her from its center, and I had done it so smoothly, so convincingly, that I had almost believed it myself. She was 9. It seemed like a small thing. It was, I understood now, the beginning of a curriculum I had been teaching her without knowing I was a teacher. Every time I absorbed the consequence, I was writing her a lesson about what love meant and what it owed her. By the time she was 29, the lesson was complete. Detective Hargrove called on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after I had filed the report. Reyes Montoya had been brought in on a federal warrant. A prior conviction in New Mexico. A different woman. A different set of accounts. The same general architecture had elevated the conspiracy charge to the federal level. Monica was listed as a co-defendant. The DA was moving forward. "You don't need to do anything further at this point," Detective Hargrove said. "I just wanted you to know." I thanked her. I hung up. I sat with that for a while, the strange, hollow feeling of justice beginning to exist in the world without requiring anything more from me. A week passed. Then, on a Wednesday morning, I found an envelope in the mailbox. I almost missed, tucked between a utility bill and a grocery circular handwritten address, Monica's handwriting, the loops and tilts of it as familiar to me as my own. 6 pages of folded notebook paper inside. I could tell from the thickness of the envelope and the slight unevenness of the seal. I brought it inside. I set it on the kitchen counter beside the fruit bowl. I looked at it. I made coffee. I drank the coffee. I looked at it again. That letter sat on my counter for 3 days. I walked past it in the morning and in the evening. I moved it once, from beside the fruit bowl to beside the mail holder, so it had more space around it. I did not open it. On the 3rd day, I sat down at the kitchen table in the late afternoon light, the envelope in front of me, and for the first time since this had all begun, I was not sure I was ready for whatever was inside. The paper Monica had used was the kind that comes in the college-ruled notebooks she had carried since junior high, narrow lines. 3-hole punched. The left margin printed in faint red. I noticed that before I read a single word. She had written in pencil, not pen, which meant she had been uncertain, or she had wanted the option to erase, or both. The pages were slightly wavy at the edges, the way paper gets when someone has pressed too hard while writing, and the pressure varied across the lines. Some words dug into the page, others barely made an impression. 6 pages of a woman arguing with herself in real time, I thought, and I flattened the first sheet against the table and I read. She did not begin with sorry. She began with, "I want you to understand," which is a different thing, not a confession, but a petition, a request that the reader rearrange themselves to accommodate the writer's interior. The first 2 pages were chronology, how the debt had started, a personal loan she had taken out under her own name 18 months before the fraud that she had not been able to repay, the way Reyes had offered the solution with the particular confidence of a man who had solved this kind of problem before. She wrote about the fear of losing her apartment, of asking me for help, and hearing me say the word she dreaded, which was no, or worse, again. She wrote about convincing herself it was temporary. She used the word temporary 4 times. I counted. Pages 3 and 4 were about Reyes, how persuasive he had been, how he had made it sound like mathematics, a simple equation, input and output, no human cost. She wrote about the storage unit with a defensive detachment, as if describing something that had happened to someone else. The items were mostly things he suggested. I didn't choose most of them. I want you to know that. The cruise she could not explain and did not try to. Then page 5. And the handwriting changed not in style, but in pressure. The letters were lighter here, and slightly uneven, the way handwriting gets when the hand is moving faster than the mind can moderate. Halfway down the page, this sentence, "I knew you would find out. I think part of me wanted you to." I read it once. I read it a second time. I read it a third time, and then I set the pages down and I looked at the ceiling, which is where my eyes go when I am processing something I cannot yet hold in my hands. That sentence was the most honest thing my daughter had written in 6 pages. It was possibly the most honest thing she had said to me in years, because embedded in it was an acknowledgement she had not allowed herself anywhere else in the letter, that some part of her had understood this was wrong and had been waiting, maybe even hoping, for the mechanism of consequence to arrive from outside herself. Since she lacked the capacity to manufacture it from within, she had needed someone to stop her. And she had chosen the one person she trusted to eventually see through her, which was me. Page 6 was short. I don't expect anything from you. I don't have the right to expect anything. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry. Not for getting caught. For doing it at all. I folded the pages back in their original creases. I slid them into the envelope. I set it in the mail holder beside the fruit bowl, where bills went when I needed to return to them, because I was not ready to decide what this letter meant or what, if anything, it required of me. Sandra called the following week with the case update I had been waiting for without realizing I was waiting for it. The DA had filed formal charges against both Monica and Reyes. Federal wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. Reyes's prior conviction had ensured the federal classification, which meant the sentencing guidelines were outside anyone's ability to negotiate softly. Monica's attorney was working on a cooperation arrangement, her testimony against Reyes in exchange for consideration on her own sentencing. The pregnancy had been noted in the file. The civil recovery action was moving parallel to the criminal case. The bank accounts connected to the wire transfer had been frozen. The storage unit's contents had been inventoried and would be liquidated against the outstanding loan balance. Is there anything you need to do? I asked Sandra. Not right now, she said. The train is moving. You just need to let it move. I did not attend any hearings. I had thought, in the beginning, that I might want to, that there would be some necessary confrontation at the center of this. A room where I would have to stand and be seen and speak. But the law does not require drama. It requires documentation, and I had provided that. So I let the proceedings move in the direction they were already moving, and I turned my attention back to my own life, which had not stopped existing while all of this had been happening. Cecilia came over on a Saturday with a pot of caldo tlalpeño she had made the night before. The soup her mother had taught her, and that she brought only to situations requiring both nourishment and kindness. She set it on the stove without asking. She found bowls in the cabinet where they had always been. We sat at the table and we ate, and for a long time we talked about everything, except Monica Cecilia's daughter was renovating a bathroom, and the contractor had disappeared for 2 weeks. There was a new doctor at the clinic I volunteered at, who ordered tests in alphabetical order, which drove everyone mad. The bougainvillea on Cecilia's fence had finally stopped fighting the Houston summer and given in to blooming purple across the entire west wall. After the second bowl, Cecilia looked at me across the table and said, quietly, "Are you going to be okay?" I had been asked that question before, in this kitchen and in other places, and I had given various versions of the same answer, which was some softened form of yes. This time, I thought about it genuinely for a moment before I spoke. "I'm going to be honest," I said, "and I think that's better than okay." Cecilia nodded. She understood what I meant. She had watched me be dishonest with myself for years, not about big things, but about the small accommodations, the overlooked moments, the explanations I had given for Monica's behavior that protected my own image of myself as a mother who had done everything right. Honesty was not a comfortable place, but it was a real one. And real, at this point in my life, was what I had room for. Marco's birthday fell on the second Saturday of August. I had remembered it the way I remember all dates that matter without writing them down, because they are embedded. I baked his cake on the Friday evening, a tres leches from a recipe I had been making since he was small, the kind of thing that requires patience and a light hand and cannot be hurried. I wrapped it carefully and drove to his apartment on Saturday morning. He opened the door in a t-shirt and socks, his hair still unsettled from sleep, and when he saw the cake carrier in my hands, his face did something uncomplicated and good. He just looked happy, the way people look before they remember to moderate it. He stepped back and said, "Tia, you didn't have to do that." "I know," I said. "Move out of the doorway." We ate at his kitchen table, which was small and slightly unsteady on one leg, the kind of table a young person buys because it was $20 and will do until something better comes along. He told me his credit application had been resubmitted with his supervisor at the warehouse as co-signer, a man who had known Marco for 3 years and had offered without being asked. It was in process. The numbers looked good. He said this carefully, not wanting to seem like he was asking me to feel something about it, but watching my face. "Good," I said. "You deserve a home. You have always done the work to deserve it." He looked at his plate. He said, "What happened with you, with your credit, with all of it, is that getting fixed?" "It's being fixed," I said. "It takes time, but yes." He nodded and didn't ask anything else, which was the right thing to do, and I noted it and felt that particular quiet pride you feel when someone you helped raise turns out to know when to let a thing rest. The clinic on Alameda Street ran a Saturday volunteer program for uninsured patients, blood pressure checks, basic vitals, medication consultations, and I had been doing it every other week for 3 years before everything with Monica had consumed my calendar. I went back on the last Saturday of August. The coordinator, a young woman named Priya, who wore her hair in a braid and moved through the clinic with the specific efficiency of someone who had learned to do the work of 4 people, handed me a tablet with the intake list and said, "We missed you," with the plain sincerity of someone who meant exactly what they said and nothing more. The first patient I saw was a woman in her mid-30s. First visit, uninsured, clearly nervous in the particular way of people who have put off coming somewhere for too long. She sat in the chair across from me and folded her hands in her lap and looked at the middle distance while I wrapped the cuff around her arm. I told her she could relax her arm, and she said she was sorry, and I said there was nothing to be sorry for. The machine beeped. I read the numbers. I wrote them on the intake form. I asked her about her medications, her sleep, whether she was eating regularly. She answered in short sentences, gradually lengthening, the way people do when they realize the room is safe. Simple work, the kind that had been the structure of my life for 3 decades. She left with a referral and the name of a cardiologist at Ben Taub who accepted sliding scale fees, and I watched her walk out through the waiting room and thought about how much of a life is made of exactly this one person in a chair, another person across from them, information exchanged that makes tomorrow slightly more possible. To whoever is reading this, I am 61 years old. My daughter committed federal fraud against me, and I reported her, and the law is handling what comes next. I am not telling you this because it was easy. I am telling you this because it was the only honest thing I knew how to do, and I have spent enough of my life choosing what was comfortable over what was true. The hardest part was not the police station or the attorney's office or the phone call where Monica told me about the baby. The hardest part was releasing the version of my daughter I had built inside my mind over 29 years, the one I had been protecting and explaining and making room for, the one I believed I could love into being if I just gave her enough of myself. That version of her was real to me. She had been real to me for a long time. Letting her go felt like a particular kind of death, the kind with no funeral and no casseroles brought to the door and no one who understands exactly what you have lost. But I let her go, and in the space where she had been, I found something I had not expected. Myself. Still here, still clear-eyed, still capable. If any of this reached something in you, a feeling you recognized, a situation you are living in or have lived through, I would like to hear from you. Leave a comment. Tell me where you are in the world. Tell me what you are carrying. And if you know someone who needs to hear that love and consequence can live in the same hand without canceling each other out, share this with them. On the drive home from the clinic, I stopped at a red light on Alameda and looked at my hands on the steering wheel. The afternoon sun was coming at a low, flat angle through the windshield, the kind of August light that turns everything it touches the color of old brass. My hands looked the same as they always have, the same lines, the same knuckles, the same small scar on the right index finger from a kitchen accident 20 years ago that I had treated myself because I knew exactly what to do. They had held a lot of things, these hands. They had held my husband's hand in a hospital room and let it go. They had signed documents that mattered, and cooked food that fed people and pressed a notary seal onto pages that made promises real. They had written down on a yellow legal pad at 2 in the morning the precise shape of a betrayal they did not want to see. And they were steady. Whatever had happened, whatever was still moving through the courts and the credit bureaus and the months ahead, they were steady. That would have to be enough. And it was.